Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending the session today. Please mute yourself upon entrance. Today, we have our speaker, Cindy Bernal. She is going to be presenting to us on a child's first and most important teacher. Cindy is the Community Outreach Coordinator for Pueblo, EPIC, which is Executives Partnering to Invest in Children, making presentations to businesses throughout the community on topics that promote the value of investing in early childhood education. She is a retired early childhood educator, spending more than 40 years working professionally in the field. She received her bachelor's and associates in early childhood education, administration, and psychology with an emphasis on early childhood education from the University of Southern Colorado and a master's certificate in advanced infant toddler care specialty from CU Denver. In addition, Cindy has represented the state of Colorado at the national level, serving on the National Association of Child Care Resource and Referral Association Board of Directors. She was appointed by the Governor of Colorado to serve as a member of the Colorado Early Childhood Advisory Team and also served as a co-chairperson for this team. She's also served in many positions with the Colorado Association for the Early Education of Young Children. There's a lot of acronyms and I don't spell or read very well. So the acronym for this is CAEYC, including serving as a state president. While with that particular organization, she was awarded the 2013 Edna Oliver and Nancy Swank Award for having given distinguished service to children and their families in the state of Colorado. And now here's Cindy.
Thank you, Aisha. You did great. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming. We really appreciate it. And please let us know if you have any questions during the presentation. We're happy to do that. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. First, I'm going to start with a little bit of background about EPIC Pueblo, because not everybody knows who we are. So we're going to start with that. And it's Executives Partnering to Invest in Children. So here we go. Oops. So our mission is that EPIC is in Pueblo. It's a nonprofit or corporation that was organized to engage and mobilize the business community of Southern Colorado to initiate programs and provide those resources and support systems and coordinate and foster all those individuals and organizations that are at the forefront of early childhood development, especially those that promote lifelong reading, availability of books, parental instruction, guidance, and involvement in early childhood education. And that can be a variety of people in a community. So all of those that are interested, including those parents and families, are a vital part of our mission, because that really ultimately is where we're at and where we want to go, and we want to support their efforts. Our vision really is about raising children in a wonderful and safe environment that's nurturing and literacy strong and supports early childhood growth and brain development. So that way, all of those young children that we have now that are infants, toddlers, preschoolers, school-age children on up, we want them, when they get to be adults, to lead our community in a positive manner. Those are our teachers, our bankers, our educators, our healthcare professionals, military, business leaders. Those are the people that are going to lead us into our future. And so we want them to have a solid background as young children, so that way our communities can grow into be healthy, strong communities. So who are we? We are a group of business leaders, nonprofits, foundations, educators that really have it as a passion in our hearts to support and enhance early childhood education and educational efforts within our community in particular, as well as those surrounding us. Sorry. So we want to make sure that we really understand what's happening. When we first started our board back in about 10, 12 years ago, the board of directors began with who was volunteer reading at one of our elementary schools in the community. And they the principal asked him, what are you enjoying this? What are you doing this for? And he said he wanted to support child growth and development. And so he asked her, what can we do to help support you, the educators and the children and families in the community? And she said, we really need to support children in early literacy and brain development, because we are receiving children throughout the community in our school system that are not ready to learn because they haven't had the advantage of that early care and education piece. And so he decided that he would do some research. He found Denver Epic, and he talked to them, and they put it all together. And he decided that he was going to start a local chapter in Pueblo. Currently, we're the only chapter of Epic other than the state. And the state Epic in Denver, Colorado, they do primarily legislation, policy making, that kind of thing, to help those new laws come into effect, make sure they're family friendly, make sure that parents are valued and supported, and that educators have the tools they need to do their job so that we're raising and educating children to be a success in their life. And so when they started, it was primarily business people on the board, and then they weren't really getting anywhere. And so they started talking to other folks around the community, and several early childhood professionals said, your thought, your concept is wonderful, and we support it 100%, but the business end of everything, a business and of life, and we know the early childhood part of it. We know the education part of it. And so you really need to have both of us at the table, so that way we can make sure that we make a whole, and that we're really not missing out on things, and that we're not trying to develop efforts in our community that only affect businesses, but not the educational arena. And so at that point, they started inviting other early childhood professionals from throughout the community. So our board now is made up of 50% business representatives and 50% of educators, which is really a really great idea. So it has worked and benefited us really well. We have our community college is represented on the board, as well as university is represented. We have private educators on the board. We have business people. We have people from the prison system that have been very interested in child development and raising children healthily, because they see what happens to children when they don't have that benefit of an early beginning that's strong and positive and solid. They end up in the prison system. So we have a few of those folks on our board. So we really are diverse, rounded board. And so that has worked really great. And so we've managed to do a lot of different kinds of things. So with that, what is it we do? We educate the business and the private sector on the importance of early childhood development, because we want to make sure they all understand that their business relies on qualified employees, and employees that can do a really good job for them in their business. But if that employee is worried about what are they going to do with their kids while they go to work, or if they have childcare of some sort, is it quality childcare? Is their child in the best and safest place? So we try to educate them on those kinds of things and how important it is to make sure that all of our children are in a safe, quality environment while their parents are at work. And so we focus mainly on birth through age 8. That's our primary focus with all of our efforts. And then we try to help those businesses figure out how to support their families so that they have family-friendly policies, so that way parents have the comfort level of going to their employer and saying, I'm having problems finding childcare, my childcare provider quit or whatever, or this maybe it just isn't a good match for their child and that specific educator. So that way there's a communication between their employer and the employee. So that way we are supporting that employee, not only as our employee, but also as a parent, as a member of society that is valued. And so we want to make sure that they understand the value of quality childcare in the community to support those workers that they employ. And then we want to engage them to go out and really champion our efforts and champion those legislative policies that are coming down from the state and national level about different bills and laws that will affect families and will affect children, because many of our legislative efforts trickle down to where they include everybody in the community. And many of those people are families and they have children. And so we want to make sure that they are valued and supported along the way. And then we want to really make sure that they are our champions. They're out there really singing our praise, helping us pass those policies to show how valuable early care and education is to a community, not just to the family, but definitely to the community, and how they can get behind us. And that can be, they can donate financially, they can volunteer, they can help us make connections within the community, whatever the case may be, depending on what our effort is at the time. We want to make sure that they are really there for us. And so those business folks have come on board and they have been a tremendous help to all of us. So that are educators, because educators tend to think kind of with our heart first and then our brain. Whereas business people kind of think with the brain first, and they're very analytical and very business minded and focused on tangible, concrete outcomes. Whereas early educators were more of that, soft, feely kind of work, and that we're raising healthy, competent children in a positive environment. And so that's not so concrete and tangible. That's hard work because you don't know what the outcome is going to be. And the outcome we're hoping will be positive, but that positive outcome may look different for each family in the community, as well as for each employer and each community member. And so we want to make sure that we're really supporting all of that drive and force in our community. So we found out that those business folks didn't fully understand care and education and the value of it and why it was so important. So we had a lot of time to take and kind of help educate them on brain development and on early literacy and all of those kinds of positives that children need to grow up healthy and strong. And so once they finally figured that out, they were really quite excited to know that all of this was happening and how important and how intricate our work is to work with children that are all over the spectrum, developmentally and age-wise, and how do we support each of them to the best of their potential while we're doing our work. And so it was really critical that we did educate those business folks so that they really had a buy-in and they fully understood what they were going to be working for and supporting for and fighting for. And that has happened. And so we're really grateful for all of their attention, all of their time, all of their work, and certainly their financial donations. So we all know that early childhood, those first few years are so critical. That foundation that we build with these children will go carry with them throughout their lifetime. So we want to make sure that it's a good, strong foundation. And with brain development, we're born and there's not a lot of brain connections. There's some, but we don't need a lot at that point. But as we grow and as we move on and as we learn, our brain connections start to multiply and they start to increase. And so in the early years, we have between 700 to 1,000 neuron connections that are forming every second and shaping the brain and figuring out how we learn, grow, how do we eat, how do we communicate, how do we do all of those different kinds of things. So brain development is very critical because our brain is really the foundation and the center of everything about our being. We cannot survive without our brain helping us learn to do things. Our brain drives our actions and drives our life. So we want to make sure that they understand. James Heckman is a Nobel laureate in economics, and he did some research for many years, and he found out that the greatest investment for any community was to have a solid foundation of young children that are growing up with the very best possible background that they can to lead our communities, and that will result in strong, healthy, financially stable communities. And so Pueblo did sponsor him. Oh, it was back in the early 2000s, excuse me. And we had him here for a day, and he presented for us, and he was very interesting because he's not an educator. He definitely is an economics professor and very data driven kind of person. And so he's done a lot of research, and he puts out a lot of good information all the time. And if you get a chance, Google him, and he's got lots and lots of papers out there that he's written about how important this is and how valuable our communities are to have this resource in our community of young children and families and early educators, because they really are the foundation for our future success in any community. And so we want to make sure that we're investing dollars in that early childhood community sector, so that way we can do the best job that we can with all the children and families that we serve. Okay, so with that kind of wraps up our portion about a brief snapshot of what early childhood education is and EPIC Pueblo. So we're going to start and move forward and go into our child's first and most important teacher, and that foundational piece of brain development. But before we do that, Tess Lyra, who is my assistant who works with us, is going to get on the screen, and she's going to read us a story and talk a little bit about that early literacy piece. Okay, Tess.
Hello, I'm here to read a book and talk to you about brain development. So the book I'm reading today is Duck on a Bike. This is written by David Shannon. And then it starts out with just a colorful ribbons. Duck on a bike. One day down on the farm, Duck got a wild idea. I bet I could ride a bike, he thought. He waddled over to where a boy parked his bike. He climbed on and began to ride. At first, he rode very slowly, and then he wobbled a lot, but it was fun. Duck rode past a cow. Hello, cow, said Duck. Moo, said the cow. But what the cow thought was, a duck on a bike? That's the silliest thing I've ever seen. Then Duck rode past a sheep. Hello, sheep, said Duck. Bah, said the sheep. But what she thought was, he's going to hurt himself if he's not careful. Who usually says that? Parents. And there's the duck. He's wanting to wave to everybody. Duck was riding by. He was riding a lot better now, and he rode past a dog. Hello, dog, said Duck. Woof, said the dog. But what he was thinking is, that's a mighty neat trick. Then Duck rode past a cat. Hello, cat, said Duck. Meow, said the cat. But what she thought was, I wouldn't waste my time riding a bike. Isn't that pretty typical of a cat? Duck pedaled a little faster. He rode past horse. He said, hello, horse, said the duck. Nay, said the horse. But what he thought was, you're still not as fast as me, Duck. Duck stood on the seat and he rode past Pig and Pig. Hello, pigs, said Duck. Oink, oink, said Pig and Pig. But what they thought was, Duck is such a show-off. Then Duck rode no hands past the mouse. Hello, Mouse, said Duck. Squeak, said the mouse. But what he thought was, I wish I could ride a bike just like Duck. Poor little mouse. Suddenly, a whole bunch of kids came down the road on their bikes. They were in such a hurry they didn't see the duck. They parked their bikes in their house and they went inside. What do you think's going to happen? They all looked at the bikes. They all jumped on the bikes. Then now all the animals had bikes. They rode past around and around the barnyard. This is fun, they all said. Good idea, Duck. Then they put the bikes back by the house, and no one knew that afternoon there had been a cow, a sheep, a dog, a cat, a horse, a chicken, a goat, 2 pigs, a mouse, and a duck on a bike. The end. And with a lot of different books that you can learn different things. And what's really good about reading to the kids and asking them questions is that they learn to predict. They can predict what's going to be happening next. And when you read them, it stimulates the optimal patterns of the brain development, which builds the strong pathways in the brain. And in turn, it builds language and literacy and social emotional skills that have long-time health benefits for every child. So it's really important that you read to the kids and get them involved and ask them questions. Make it conversational, because that also helps with the development too. So almost any book can be a really good teaching tool for the kids and help with their brain and stimulate the brain development. Is there any questions?
Oh, Tess, I wanted to make sure that I announced you before you were coming on. So
I'm
please
so
allow
sorry.
me to say your biography.
Okay.
You've got some good stuff going on here, ma'am. All right. So Tess has an associate's degree in childhood development in 1980. And then she got a job at Tulare County Office of Education in California as the home base of the home visitor for the Head Start program. She worked for 8 months and a year and for 10 years had her family childcare home during the summer and on the weekends. Tess then became an early childhood specialist for the subsidized programs, where she trained, supervised, and inspected licensed childcare centers, licensed family childcare homes, and unlicensed parent-selected providers. Tess then became a lending library and licensing manager with a staff of 7 specialists. She went on to earn a master's degree in human development and began teaching at Porterville Community College as an adjunct professor. After completing 20 years of work at the Tulare County Office of Education, she became the first early childhood consultant for the Kings County Office of Education in California for the entirety of the grant of 7 years. So thank you very much, Tess, for reading us a book.
Thank you. So I really enjoy working with kids, and what's really great about reading is that it really gets their attention and it also helps develop those skills. If you make it a regular routine, it really helps with their sleep at night too. If they get into the routine of hearing a book every night, it actually prepares them for sleep, and they actually sleep better with many studies that they've done. Is there any questions or any other ideas you have?
A question.
Yes.
May you please read another book?
Another book. Do we have time for? I don't have one with me. I'm sorry. I left them all in the car. But thank you for asking. I really appreciate it.
Please.
But you can get your mom to get a book and you can read it together.
Please.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tess.
You're welcome.
We do have a question in the chat. It says, up to what age is it most important to read to kids?
It's actually all your lifelong. When you are regularly reading, there's so many benefits that you get. It exercises the brain. It's a form of free entertainment because with the libraries that they have, we have public libraries in every community. You can borrow the books for free. It also improves your concentration and your ability to focus, and improves literacy because when you read, you learn new words and expand your vocabulary. Again, it improves your sleep, and it increases your general knowledge because when you read about different things that you don't know, you start learning more. It's motivational. You can learn a lot of things to talk about and things to try. And it reduces stress. It sets a positive example for the kids to see you reading. And it also teaches empathy. So those are the main top 10 benefits of reading.
Okay, any other questions? Comments? No? Okay. Thanks, Tess.
Thank you.
So now we're going to start to talk about parents, a child's first and most important teacher. Of course, we all know as parents that our job is very valuable. It's very important to our child, but what we don't think about is how important our job as a parent is to our community at large. And so we want to make sure that all parents understand that they are a very important part of our human infrastructure in our communities, and that we need to support you as much as we can with whatever is coming on down the pike and whatever kind of issues, concerns, challenges you may have as a parent. So parents are the very most important people in a child's life. The parents, they know your child more than anybody else. You know how they work, what they makes them tick, what they like to do, where their strengths lie, where their weaknesses are, what kinds of lives and environment they come from. So it's really critical that educators understand the value of parents, and that the parents really are the most important person in a child's life, and the parents are the most important people that understand children and your own particular child, especially because we want to make sure that your child is valued when they go into a early care and education program. We want to make sure that they understand what your child is all about, and are there special, unique things about your child. And I would say, from my experience and education, that every child is very, very indeed special and very important and very unique. And so we want to make sure that we're providing services for them that meet that child's particular need. And if you ever are in a program where you're not feeling that your child is valued or a good fit, or they just don't understand, it's up to you as a parent to fight for that child, to advocate for that child, to make sure that they are understood, and never ever let an administrator or an educator tell you, well, no, you really don't know, you don't understand. You may not understand their program and what their boundaries are and their limitations, but you are the expert on your child, and so you know what your child needs. And there are laws that help you and support you, making sure your children are served to the best of their ability to get the quality education that they deserve. So we want to make sure that all children are valued wherever they're taken for care. And even if it's just, if it's a parent that stays at home, that's a valuable job. And how can we support you in your efforts? So we need to hear parents' voices. We need to hear what you need, because if we don't hear what you need, then sometimes people in positions of power just make up their own kind of rules and regulations without really understanding, is this reality for those that we serve and that we're making the rules for? So we want to make sure that all of that is part of every community. And that's a big, huge part for EPIC, is we want to advocate for parents, and we want to teach them to advocate on behalf of their own child. And not to step down and say, throw up your arms and say, okay, well, you're the expert, you do what you think is best. Because if it's not in your heart that what they are proposing is best for your child, then don't give in. you fight for that, because your child is so important. And that's how we get laws and rules and legislation changed, because people fight for what they need. So we want to make sure that we're really giving those kiddos a strong foundation as young as possible. So that way, as you move through the school system, you know how to advocate for your child, and you can continue to advocate as they get older and move from early childhood care and into elementary school and middle school and high school and college and beyond. So we want to make sure that we're supporting you, because we want all our children to succeed and have a really good life. So why are parents the best teachers? Because you know your child. You know them better than anybody else knows them. You know what makes them work. You know what they want to do, what they like to do. You know where they've been. You know if they've had adverse situations at home. It could be a variety of things that they had no control over that have happened, because life happens to all of us. And so we want to make sure that educators understand that. And it helps the educator to do a really good job working with your child if you give them as much information as you can. And I know it's really hard sometimes as parents. I know when I was working in the classroom and parents would say, well, you know, there's stuff going on at home, but it's, you know, it's private. And we try to keep what's happening at home, which is, you know, which is okay, which is, you understand, people are entitled to their privacy, but you need, at that point, you need to talk to the parent and say, but just give us enough information so we know that there's some background to the concern we're having, or the issues we're seeing, or the behavior that's developing, or whatever the situation may be, because it helps them to do their job the best they can to serve your child in the best possible way. But if they're working blind and have no information of the background or where that child may be coming from, then that's really makes their job that much harder. And, you know, children tend to internalize a lot in their lives, and some things that happen in their life doesn't seem like a big deal to us as adults, but maybe to a child, it's really traumatic. You know, the loss of a pet can be very traumatizing for adults and for children especially. And so we don't want to minimize that. We want to make sure that we help the children, or the parents and the children, understand how valuable we think they are. And that it is a crisis, and it is critical for that family to receive services during that time, or, you know, if at the very least, be very empathetic to that family to know that they are going through something that is touching them emotionally very deeply. And how can we support that? And understand that when children are feeling stuff going on in their life, their behavior will demonstrate some of that, because they don't have the language, the experience, the words to tell you what they're feeling. And they have feelings, but they don't understand their feelings. So we need to make sure that we're extra supportive of them, and not decide, oh, well, I don't know what's going on with Jimmy. And he was, you know, he's always been such a compliant, busy, active, normal little guy. And then all of a sudden he's bouncing off the walls, and we can't seem to rein him in and figure out what's going on. Well, that's a behavior that is not typical to Jimmy. So it's up to us as educators to figure out what's going on. Something has happened to that child to cause that extra behavior to develop all of a sudden. It just doesn't happen typically. So we want to make sure that we're supporting those parents and help them understand. And when we do that, we want to approach parents in a very caring, understanding, open-minded sort of way. So that way we're working together. We're not criticizing them. We're not accusing them of anything. We're just here to help and have the outcome together of this child of theirs being highly successful. So we want to make sure that educators understand how valuable children are and how valuable the parents are. And we, you know, people may not always agree with each other, and that's okay. But be respectful about that. So that way we're not harming the child because we're so busy in our own adult frame of mind trying to be difficult with each other, or, you know, trying to make the other one figure out that you need to figure it out my way because I'm not going to do it your way. So we want to make sure that parents understand they have a legal right to advocate on behalf of their child for whatever situation they may find themselves in. Because parents really are their child's first and most important teacher, and they know their child intimately, and they know what's going on with that child. They know what's happening. And so they need to be respected for all of that knowledge, because that makes us as educators, our job that much simpler, because parents have all this knowledge. We just need to ask them to share it with us. So those early years, like I said, birth to 8 are very critical. We want to make sure that we're giving all of our young children a strong, sturdy foundation. And sometimes, we get kids that are coming from families that are having a hard time, and that the child has gone through a hard time. And so how do we help them? We need to help them by figuring out, what is it they need? And it's not for us to decide what they need. It's for the parent to tell us, what do you need? And sometimes the parent doesn't even know what they need. They just know that they have needs. Things aren't going great. They just, they don't have the resources. They don't know where to turn. We want to make sure that we have resources for the parent. We can point them in a direction. It's not up to any individual person, regardless of whether you're a professional person or an educator, business person, whatever. We want to make sure that we know that there are others out there that have expertise in a variety of areas that can help children and families. And there's nothing wrong with asking for help. We all need help at some point in our life. So we want to make sure that those things are happening, and that children understand that they're loved and cared for, because we want the child to grow healthy, both mentally, socially, and physically. And in order to do that, we need to have everyone working together that is interacting in that child's life as a team, not as adversaries, but working together to support that family. Because those early relationships really make a huge difference in a child's life and in the family's life as well as the community. The community is kind of that third party there that gets all the benefits of all the hard work that happened before that. So we want to make sure that all of that is good, sturdy, strong, positive efforts towards building that child, building those relationships. And everything we do that's positive for children and families really supports that healthy growth and brain development. Because remember, I said the brain really is that focal point of all of our being. It controls everything about us. So we want to make sure it's as strong and healthy as we can, as it can be. And then children, they're very curious. They want to learn. They love it. I mean, just like that little girl that asked for another story. Bless your heart. If we have time, I have a story and we'll read it at the end. But we want to make sure that we're really caring about those kiddos, that we understand that what we do is making such an impact on them. They listen, they hear, and they pay attention. And sometimes you don't think they are, but somewhere down the road, they will be. So you want to make sure that things are really happening the way that they should be happening for the kids. So parents, caregivers, take those chances. Every moment in a child's life is a learning opportunity. You could be driving in a car somewhere. You could be grocery shopping. You could be at a musical event. You could be doing a variety of things. Take those opportunities to build that brain and help the children get stronger socially, emotionally, and their brain and their whole being will benefit for it. So we want to make sure that we're taking those learning opportunities everywhere we go. They're driving down the road, look at stop signs. What shape is that? They're learning their numbers or their letters. They can pick those out, in the grocery store when they're shopping, and read the labels or whatever. I mean, there's all kinds of learning experiences. And I know sometimes parents tell me, but Cindy, that takes time. When I go to the grocery store, or when we're traveling or whatever we're doing, we're usually in a hurry. And, and I understand that, because, we as human beings nowadays, we're always in a hurry for everything. But we need to stop and slow down a little bit for our kids. And it doesn't mean that you have to, everything and every moment, you have to make it an extended learning moment. That would be ideal, of course, but that's not realistic for any of us. But pick those times and moments that you can make those learning opportunities for your kiddos, because they will benefit from it, as will you. So make sure that you're taking those opportunities, and make sure that you're always engaging with your kids, even, if you're busy. When I was going to school, my husband was going to school. And so we'd had, our evenings were spent across the dinner table doing homework, and the kids were right there with us. They were doing their homework, and we were supporting each other. And yes, it took us longer to get everything done because, there were 4 of us instead of 1 of us just doing our own thing. But take those chances and opportunities, so that way you're still giving your child valuable quality parent time, because that is more important than anything else that they're going to get anywhere else. They can't get that in an educational setting. They can get it from you. But the one thing we want to remember is we don't want to push too hard for our kids, and we don't want to have unrealistic expectations for our child. And it's not about the child's age. When I was teaching at the college, the one thing I would tell my students, if you did not remember anything I taught you this whole semester, the one thing I want you to remember is the only thing that counts for a child is their developmental age. Where are they developmentally? Because a 3-year-old is not just a 3-year-old. They're not just doing 3-year-old activities and growth and development. They're still pulling from some of those 2 experiences and some of those 2-year-olds and 2.5-year-old skills. And they're moving on from maybe into the 3s and the 4s. And so there's not a specific number age you can put on a child, because it's all about development. And so pay attention to your child's growth and development. Where are they developmentally? And so, and never ever compare them to another child, because that is just really, really hard to try to live up to somebody else's expectations, because that child that you might be comparing him to is not that child that you have in front of you right here and now. And that's really hard when we have children of different genders, because boys and girls, they're different. Thank the Lord, they're different. We want them to be different because they are, and they have different uniquenesses about themselves. And so we want to make sure that we're giving them every opportunity. And that doesn't mean that boys can't play with dolls and girls can't play with trucks, because you know what? There are some great mommies out there that learned how to be, a dad by watching her dad, and can share that with others and share that with her child eventually, and vice versa. So we want to make sure that whatever that child is doing is perfectly okay. It is who they are, and there's nothing wrong with it. Support that. So sometimes we forget about how challenging we push our kids and make them feel. We ask them to do things that they just can't do. So I'm going to ask you to just take a quick minute and just take a couple deep breaths, and then we're going to do an activity together. So I want you now to get your elbow, whichever elbow you want, I don't care. You can get your elbow up in the air. Then I want you to write your name. And if you have a long name, like, maybe, let's see, Melissa, it's going to be harder, but write it the best you can. Cindy's kind of short, so it's kind of hard, but you have to really concentrate, right? And you have to think, okay, which letter did I do now? And which one am I going to do next? That's not so easy, is it? And I'm glad to see our little friend there is trying to write her name as well. That's wonderful. But you feel challenged doing something that simple, because that's not something we typically do. That's how children feel when we ask them to do something and give them a task that they're not comfortable with, that they have no experience with, that really challenges them. So break it down into steps for them. Give them those opportunities to do what is right and what is right for them. So, that brain really does have a part to play. And when you're writing your name with your elbow, you have to think about it with your brain. How do I make the letter C? That's an easy one. I is easy. N, not so easy. You know, D, not as easy, Y is even harder. So think about that when we challenge children. Are we giving them two things, too much to do too soon? Are those unrealistic expectations for kids? So give them something a little bit simpler and they'll move into those harder, more difficult activities. But not everything's going to come to every child easily. So healthy development for young children really is important for young children. We're going to make sure that we're not only taking care of them health-wise and socially wise and brain-wise, but all of their being is being addressed. And if the child is not healthy, then it's hard for them to excel and grow developmentally in other areas. I worked at the YWCA, which is a women's crisis shelter here in Pueblo, for a number of years. And I remember when I was hiring a staff, I was a child counselor and I started the child care program there. And I hired a staff to help me with the child care program. And she had many years of experience. And she, at the end of one day, she said, you know, Cindy, she said, the children that we serve here are so unique. She said, their behaviors are so different from children coming from what we would, I guess, label as typical environments. These children are homeless. They've had to leave their home because of a crisis situation. And so their behaviors show it differently. And she said, you know, when I decided to apply here, I thought we were going to have children that were huge behavior problems that could not control themselves because of what they've been through. And we did have a few of those, but the majority of those children were not that, because that had been taken away from them. They were fearful. They did not act out because they were fearful of what could happen to them or someone they love. And so, you know, we have to try to look at those children, and sometimes we get them in our programs, and we have to be aware that they've come from some adverse situations that are not the best in the world for them, but we have to make accommodations for them. And we've all heard about accommodations for children that have special needs. And usually that means something physical in the environment we have to change. But we have to remember children need accommodations mentally as well. That mental health and that brain development is so critical that we have to give them space. We have to nurture them in a way so that they feel safe, so that they can start to grow and develop on their own spectrum. And any child that has been in a crisis situation can only focus their development on survival. And so, you know, we would get kids that the parent would say, well, my child has been potty trained for, you know, since they were 2. And now here we are 2 years later and not potty trained anymore. I don't know. I've talked, I've screamed, I've yelled, I've gone blue in the face, and nothing helps. So we had to talk to the parent and explain, child has been through some trauma. Child is not going to focus on potty training. And this isn't something the child does mentally or knowing what they're doing. Their body and system can only deal with so much because they're so young. And they have already lived a life of experiences that are so challenging for them that they can't focus on being a child doing typical, normal, developmental kinds of behaviors. So we want to make sure that we're looking at all those kids, and we don't just jump to a conclusion that a child with behaviors that are not acceptable are because the child is a bad child, or because a child hasn't been disciplined, or whatever we might think. We want to make sure that we figure out what's going on with that child. So with those kids, you want to have a little bit of a softer touch, and you want to kind of give them that extra hug and, you know, emotional and just attention. And because we want all our children to have a safe, loving home, that they have a family that nurtures them. And so nurturing a child is really about engaging with that child, connecting with that child, you know, singing songs when you're driving down the road, reading a book, and take turns reading, you know, and you're probably thinking, well, my child's only 2, she can't read. No, she can't read the words, but she can read the pictures and the pages, and she may skip a few pages. That's okay. And story may be somewhat different than what's on the page, but that's okay too. It gives them that opportunity to learn and to grow and to nurture that brain. So we want to make sure that we're giving those opportunities to the kiddos. And so that valuable time between the child and the parent is so critical that it's the most important thing that you can give your child. And of course, you want to make sure you give them all of those other basic needs in life. You want to make sure they're fed and that, you know, they have all of their needs, their basic needs met, and they have things that they need to be safe and healthy, because all of that is going to make a big difference for your child. Oops, went the wrong way. Sorry. So again, as I said before, home is the very first classroom. What the child learns at home, even if that child is taken into a childcare center and there's just an infant, even that is important for that child and for the educators to know what that home environment was about, because that way it gives them a heads up to, you know, where is this child at developmentally? That way they'll kind of have a starting point working with your child. So it's important that you share that information with them. And, you know, some programs such as Head Start is one that has been notorious for many years. They have a strong piece in their program that is a home visitation, and they go out and they do that. And that is so critical, and it's so helpful when you're working as an educator to be able to get into the home and see where that child is coming from. So that way, when they're talking about ding dong, you know that it's not a yummy snack that they're talking about. Ding dong happens to be their pet bird, you know, or whatever the case may be. Those kinds of things can really help the educator do a better job and help that child grow and develop, and make sure that all of those things that are familiar to the child carry from one environment to the other. And so we want to make sure that our environments, whether they're at home or in this educational setting or a church setting or wherever, that they really provide that stimulation for kids to think about and to learn and to process and to get creative with what they want to do. So, you know, do learning games with your kids, do activities, let them help you cook. And it doesn't have to, you know, be real detailed, and know that it's going to be messy, and know that sometimes the outcome's not going to be what you were hoping it would be. But the outcome of the value to your child is going to be so very great that it's worth all the mess and all of the chaos that it caused. So make sure that you're spending that time with the kiddos in the very best way that you can, that the time you are giving your child, even if it's just a short time, that you can really pay attention to what's happening and make sure that your attention is all right there on your child, not on the TV, not on the phone, not on the neighbor, not on the friend, not on some other thing that you've got going on in your head that you know is critical and important for your life. But that quality time with your kiddos is so very important.
Miss Cindy?
Yes.
We can't see your screen anymore. It's not sharing anymore.
It's not sharing? Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay.
Well, let me see if I can find it. I don't know what happened to it. I don't have anything to... Let's start over here. Thank you for telling me, because can you see it now?
No, not yet. Melissa.
Okay. Let's see. Let me go back here and then share my screen from here again and see if we can do it that way. Did that come up?
Yeah, it's working now.
Okay, good. Thank you so much. I apologize. I hope you didn't miss anything. Do I need to?
No, you're good. You're good.
Okay.
We didn't miss anything.
Did somebody have a question or comment? Okay, so 90% of brain development really does happen before age 5. So when you think about that, that is huge. That means that how we nurture our brain is so critical to us and to our child that we really need to pay attention to those first 5 years, because our brain is growing and developing at a rate that will not happen that quickly from that point on. So we want to make sure that we're really working with those kiddos and helping them with that brain development, and know that the brain is so important. And did you know, it's a couple of fun facts about the brain. The brain is mostly made up of water. 73% of our brain is water. And the brain's consistency is that of a ripe avocado. That's kind of how the consistency of our brain is made up of. And does anybody know the average adult brain, how much it weighs? No guesses? Okay. Between 26 and 28 pounds. So you figure that's a lot of weight out of our entire weight for our whole body. So the brain really has a lot of work. It has a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of things happening in the brain. So we want to make sure that we are taking those early years and making them the best we can, so that way our children's brains are growing and developed to the very best of their potential. And we don't know what that potential is for each child. It's different, and it's different at different times of our life. So we want to make sure that we are taking the most time we can, especially during those early years, to develop our brain. And how do we do that? We nurture the children. We give them good nutrition. We give them good food that's healthy for them. And because, as we said, the brain is made up of 73% water. So why do you think sometimes when you're dehydrated, when you haven't drank enough fluids in the day, that you kind of get brain fog? It's because we've drained our brain of some of the valuable moisture and nourishment it needs. So we need to drink more water in order for it to be healthy. And that's not only us, but it's also our children. So we want to make sure that that's happening as well. And we want to make sure that all our children have as many positive experiences growing up as we can provide. Negative stuff's going to happen because life happens. And 99% of the time, life happens over things that we have no control over. It's not something we planned and went through or did or whatever. It just happens, and no one's to blame. But how do we come back from that? How do we get a positive outlook then and move forward? Because if we do that for ourselves, we do it for the children as well. And so all of those kinds of positives and negatives help develop our brain, but we want to make sure we're putting out there as many positives as we can, especially for those kiddos as when they're so young, because so much growth and development is happening in that brain. So this is a scan of the neurons within the brain. And as I said, when the babies are born, there isn't a whole lot there in the brain going on. Because there was no need to. Every need was being met by the mother in having the child in utero. So as you can see, there's not a lot of neurons and synapses there. But then by the time they get to 6 years old, look at how many have developed. But then you look down the road here at 24, there aren't as many brain cells. And that doesn't mean that we're not as intelligent as we were. What it means is that the brain is such a unique organ, and that it takes care and nurtures itself, that it starts to prune off some of those cells and those neurons and synapses that aren't being used, that we don't have to use anymore, because whatever has happened, because of how our environment is, how our life has been. There's some things that we may have learned along the way or used some brain cells for that we don't need anymore. So the brain, in its unique function, will prune those cells that aren't being used. So as we grow and develop, we don't have as many, but we still have brain development going on. So our brain can continue to add new brain cells as we grow and as we learn. So we never stop learning. It's just that we never have quite as many cells and synapses as we did when we were 5 or 6 years old. So we want to make sure that that's one of those things that we're thinking about. How do we support that for children and our families? And in our brain, as I said, I call these neurons and synapses, so the connections that put them together. There are about 86 billion neurons in our brain by the time we grow to adulthood. So that's a lot that's going on in there. So we have to decide, where we're going to learn, how we're going to learn. Our brain figures all of that out, puts it in categories, and makes things happen for us. And those connections happen so that they can build networks so that we can learn and grow and develop. And that means not just our children, but us as adults. But it's probably more critical to be intentional about how we nurture our young children, that those cells can continue to grow and develop. And of course, there's things that happen in life that stop our brain from growing. Sicknesses, illnesses, accidents, trauma, a variety of things can happen. But how we can continue to jumpstart that and get it going again by inserting those positives back into that child's life. And depending on what the situation is that stopped those brain cells from producing so much and being so strong, we have to kind of look at the child and see, where are they at now? How can we developmentally help them now, instead of this is where they were, but they had, a severe illness, and now they're not the little person they were before. And that may be true, but this is who they are right now. So how can we support where they're at and nourish them to see where they're going to be in the future? So we want to make sure that all of that is happening with them as well. So you have this handout, and as you can see on the right of the scan is a brain scan of a 5-year-old. The brain has a lot of dark matter in it. And this is a brain that has not been nourished. So those brain cells have not made those connections. And it could not have been nourished for a variety of reasons. It could be to illness. It could be to abuse. It could be to just lack of stimulation. It could be, to a variety of things. But that's not what we want our children's brains to look like. So if you look at the brain on the left, you see there's not so much dark matter. There's room for more brain cells to grow, but there's a lot of other colored matter that really helps that brain grow and develop, and shows us a brain that's been nurtured through their youth and through their childhood and been in nurturing environments, not just at home, but maybe at school, at grandma's, at church, or activities that they're involved in, or whatever. So quite a few years ago, Kaiser Permanente in California did a study on brain development in young children, because Dr. Nadine Harris Brooks, she was an MD working in California in some very low economic communities, high-risk communities that were disadvantaged, didn't have a lot of support from other, from their base community. They weren't rich communities. And she was serving the children there as a medical doctor. And kids would come in and they'd have illness or sickness or something that they were complaining about. And she would treat the physical illness, and the child might seem to get better for a short time. But then 9 times out of 10, that parent would come back in her office with the child with either the same illness repeating itself, or something else had happened to the child and some other illness or some other problem had come up. And after, a number of years, she thought, this is not okay. I'm not really helping the kids because I don't know what's causing them to become physically ill over and over and over again. So she talked Kaiser Permanente, who was her employer, into giving her staff and research money to figure out what's going on. And so as a matter of time and years went by, they were able to come up with adverse early childhood, excuse me, excuse me, I've got a dry throat here. Adverse early childhood experiences that really were affecting the kids, because as I said, these families she was serving were coming from a low economic area that the kids didn't always have the best food and and water available, and all of those supports that they need to grow and develop healthy. Excuse me. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to share my screen here for a second, and I'm going to show you the book that Dr. Harris wrote. And the beauty about this book, it's a great book. If you ever want to purchase it, excuse me, it is written not from a doctor's perspective. I mean, it is from her perspective, but it's written in layman's terms where you can read it, where, me, then I'm not a medical person by any means. I could read it and understand it. And she shares some of the stories of the families. And it really is critical and important to show what kinds of things have happened. And after doing this study and figuring out that if they didn't figure out what the base of the problem was, she was not going to help the children long term. They were not going to get well. And so in the back of this book, there is a survey you can take for yourself. It's not, to be necessarily be shared with anybody else, but it's a short survey with questions and that ask you about different circumstances in your life. Let me grab my real quick here, and I'll read you a couple of the questions that it asks. Did a parent or other adult in the household often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you? And they're all yes or no answers. Did you often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special? But there's 10 questions on here, and they're all kind of those kinds of personal questions about your childhood. And the way they came up with a score for this ACEs questionnaire was if you had 4 or more of those questions that were answered yes, that meant that you had adverse early childhood experiences growing up. So that was going to affect your life, and that was going to have a way of explaining some of the behaviors that were happening through your childhood, that was happening to you, that will manifest itself as they get older and as they grow. And so many of these children, as I said, have physical ailments that were being caused by all of these adverse experiences children had because they could not grow healthy, because they had not been treated and supported during those times that those kinds of things were happening to them. So it's really a great book. And our founder, as I said, Bernie Zerker, he found this book and he bought a copy for everybody on the board because he felt it was so critical in the work that we do to understand that sometimes behavior isn't just poor discipline or poor parenting, because no parent wants to, be a poor parent. Life happens and things happen. And sometimes parents just don't have the tools they need to do parenting at the highest quality they would like. And so that's one of the reasons EPIC is really strong about strengthening families and supporting families, because we need to give them the support they need so those kiddos can grow up strong and healthy and be responsible community members that are going to be our leaders, our future leaders, run our communities, make our decisions for all of us as we live. So if you are inclined, I would try to check that out of the library or buy the book. It's a really great read. It really explains a lot about children and those experiences happens to us as children through later life. So you all have this handout. This is about child brain growth and development at 0 through 2. And I really like this one because it really talks about, good nutrition, loving, consistent care. So it kind of jumps that spectrum of the brain for those littlest people that we have in our lives. So we want to make sure that we're making those connections, as it shows under 0 through 1, that they have We're nurturing the brain. We're providing good nutrition, which also nurtures the brain, not just the physical being. Their social emotional development is critical. And so we want to make sure that by age 1, infants understand about 70 words. Most infants, if they are in a nurturing environment, will exceed that 70 word count. But we want to make sure that all our kids have that opportunity. And even though in our own environment, we may think, well, sure, all my kids did, all the kids I worked with, but you know what? There may be a neighborhood in your community that's not happening. So how do we support those families as well? And then if you look at 1 to 2 years, they really are starting to communicate. Their brain cells are really starting to connect, where they're starting to be more verbal and talk, and people can understand what they're saying, and they're starting to put thoughts together so that things make sense. And so we want to make sure that we're nurturing them and giving them opportunities to grow and develop, so they learn to problem solve and to have that critical thinking part of their brain beginning to develop and function and learn and work and get them through one day to the next. And so we want to make sure that all of those children have those opportunities. But as those of you that are parents or have been around young children, you know, those are challenging years because they're very curious. And so we have to watch them constantly because they get into things that they shouldn't. And so it really makes our job that much more challenging to make sure that they're healthy and strong. So we want to make sure that we're keeping our environments very safe for them. And so we want to, by the time they are 1 to 2 years old, they're starting to increase that vocabulary. They're gaining more words and more things are happening for them in their life and things are getting good. And then by the time they're 2 years old, we really want to make sure that they have at least a minimum of 300 word vocabulary. And then from there, it just kind of like grows like gangbusters. They just start verbalizing. And I know when I worked with some of the parents and they would say about their 2 or 3 year old, they just won't be quiet. They talk nonstop. And then I say, you know what? That is such a good thing to hear, because that's what we want for our little people. We want them to verbalize. We want them to learn to connect words with items and feelings and, you know, and make sense of their world and make sense of what's happening around us. And it shows that cognitively in their brain, they're growing, they're developing, and they're doing what they should be doing that are going to result in positive outcomes for them. So that's that chart. And I like that one because it kind of breaks it down easily for us to understand. But with that, I'll show you the 30 million word book, which is another book that Bernie Zerker shared with us. And it talks about those 30 million words that children should have by the time they enter kindergarten. And that those children that have not had those language-rich environments and opportunities in their life, by the time they get to formal education, which society says formal education is, you know, kindergarten, first grade. We as early educators know it's much earlier than that, but they should have 30,000 or 30 million words eventually. But those children that enter kindergarten without a language-rich environment, they will have around 1,500 word vocabulary. Whereas those other children that had those nurturing environments, it will be at least double that. So we want to make sure that we're providing those environments so kids will all have that same opportunity to be nurtured and to grow and to have language-rich environments. So the book is really a great opportunity to read about language development and early literacy in children and how we can support that as those primary people in their lives. So our brains really are responsible for so many things. Our brains do so many things for us. So 0 to 6 is a national organization that really focuses on that age group, 0 through 6, and how we can nurture and what's good for kids during those early years, and how we as individuals, families, grandparents, whatever, educators, community members, how can we be a part of that? How can we nurture it and make sure all our children have that same opportunity? And so they looked at all of this, and they kind of dissected the brain. And so there's different parts of the brain that affect different behaviors and different learning areas that we grow and develop for. So, like the frontal lobe, in the pink on the scan on the left, that really is where we learn our reasoning. Our behavior comes from that part of the brain. Our memory, our judgment, our intuition, our moods, all of that comes from that piece. And then the perinatal portion, which is the pink part of that brain scan on the left, really is about that learning rote piece, reading, math, science, learning about left and right, and sensations, and all of those things come from that part of the brain. And then the part that's green there, the light green, is occipital, the lobe, and that really is what controls our vision. So, that's always been interesting to me, because it's our vision. Our eyes are up front, but the part of the brain that controls it is really in the back. And so, but that's where it's at. And right beneath that is the cerebellum, and that really has to do with our balance, our coordination, our fine motor, our large motor development, all of those things. And then the white brain stem there, that functions and controls our breathing, our blood pressure, our heart rate, how we can eat and swallow. And then the pituitary, which is the temporal lobe there, the temporal lobe is the language development piece, where we comprehend, and our cognition comes into play, and comprehension and behavior, memory, hearing, emotions, all of that comes from that piece of the brain. So we want to make sure that we're nurturing all of those things. And I know some people have often said, well, you're a right brain or a left brain person, and so that's where your strengths are and where you excel. But that really isn't necessarily the case, because yes, we all have a right brain and we all have a left brain, but they work in tandem together. They don't work in isolation. But if we have a medical situation with our brain, we have an injury or something, sometimes, and it happens on the right side of the brain or whatever, it's damaged. And so, of course, it's not going to function the way that it used to or should, but it can be retaught. And if that part of the brain is so damaged that they can't reteach that, the left part of the brain will take over from there, from some of those skills. But that's a long, road of therapy, and it's a lot of work, but it is possible. So even though people say, well, you're left brain minded or you're right brain minded, that's kind of is just a misnomer that you're one or the other, because we're not. We're an entire brain that works in tandem together from both sides. So we pay attention to that to make sure that when we're nurturing children, we always nurture the child to the best of our ability, so that we're affecting all parts of the brain, so that they can grow and develop as we would hope for all our children. And then, there's been so much research in the last 20 years or so about brain development, because, way back when, people thought the brain was kind of like, it just, your body was there to hold your brain up. That was the only purpose it was there. And it really didn't provide a whole lot. Aristotle thought that all of our intelligence actually came from our heart, not from our brain. But through research, through time, through science, we've learned that the brain has all these functions and is so critical to us as a complete and total human being, growing and nurturing and learning and living complete and full lives. So we want to make sure that all of our children have that opportunity. So as they grow, their vocabulary gets bigger. They can learn to read and to write, and they can focus on a task, and they can concentrate better when they need to. And, for some of us, it's hard to concentrate on things. Some of us, we thrive in active environments and we can concentrate anywhere. Whereas other of us, we need somewhere quiet and, we need to just focus on what we're trying to do. And that's what we need to make it happen for us. So we need to look at those individual needs of children and what is it they need to learn best. Not one size fits all for all kids. As I used to tell my students at the college, that when you're setting up your classroom for the coming year, you're setting it up for yourself because you know what's good. And so you put it out and you know what you like. And so you make it really inviting, but it's inviting to yourself. And until you get those kids in that classroom, you don't know if that classroom is set up to provide optimal learning for for every child. Because some child learn by, doing, touching, feeling. Others children learn by listening and hearing. Other children, they kind of do a little bit of both. And so how do we set up a classroom that is conducive to each child's way of learning? We want to make sure that we're addressing that. So then I tell them, within the first month of school, having new kids in your classroom, you figure out how to change your learning center. So that way there's some kind of learning opportunities for each kind of learner. Because otherwise, if you don't, number one, you're not servicing all the children as they should be serviced. Number two, you're setting yourself up for behavior problems because those kids that don't have a way to learn that best fits their needs, they're going to cause chaos in the classroom. So we want to make sure that even at home, we're doing those things, we're addressing those kinds of environments around the house. And some kids can't take a lot of stimulation. So sometimes, you need to put away stuff around the house. They're not getting into your pretty little knickknacks or whatever because they want to destroy them. They're curious and they want to learn. And sometimes too much stimulation causes those kids to just display unacceptable behaviors because they can't control themselves yet. They're too young. They don't have that experience and that knowledge and that self-control built into themselves yet. So we want to make sure that we're really paying attention to all of those things. And we want to promote those 5 areas of brain development. Reading, as Tess said, she read that book, and that is so, so important that we read to our kids. And as I said, you don't have to read the words. You can read the pictures. It's okay. When I was teaching preschool way back when, we had a little guy who was quite smart, quite intelligent, and his dad was studying to be a paramedic. And so he would help his dad study at night, and he could read. This little 4-year-old could read very, very well. So reading a story to the classroom, and those of you that have ever known a teacher or are a teacher, you tend to teacher read. So sometimes you might skip a word or two that the kids might not understand, or shorten the story because the kids are starting to get antsy. Well, with this 4-year-old, I couldn't do that because he'd say, Miss Cindy, that's not what the page said. You have to go back and read all the words. But that was, in all of my 30 some years, that was the only child ever had to do that. But he could read. He couldn't, he was definitely way ahead on that developmental spectrum. But other than that, everything else was, he was right there, 3, 4. He was a great and very interesting child. But you never know what you're going to get and how your child is. And so if your child is one of those kids, I wish his mother had came and told me, when she enrolled him, he can read. But to them, it wasn't anything, that big a deal because it just happened. It was their first child. They didn't know that all 4-year-olds couldn't read college books. They didn't know that. So pay attention to where your kiddos are, and give them those opportunities. Read to them. We are part of a national campaign, a 15-minute read to your children. It's read aloud 15 minutes. And you can go online and they have all kinds of handouts and interesting materials for young families that they can download for free. And so here's just a quick flyer, one of the flyers they have, and they have all kinds of interesting things that for parents and for children, activities to do. And 99% of it is free and you can get it. And the premise behind this effort is that if every child were read to at least 15 minutes of every single day, their vocabulary would be well above what they need when they enter formal education. They would be successful as they grow up and they turn into adults and they would be successful community leaders. So those 15 minutes don't necessarily have to be 15 minutes at one time, because as I said, developmentally, kids are all over the place. And so, some kids can sit for 15 minutes and listen to a story. Some kids can sit for 15 seconds and listen to a story, and that's okay. We need to try to break that up for those kids that their attention span is not quite developed yet. So we can read those 15 minutes throughout the day. You can start the day with a short story in the morning, and then maybe at lunchtime or in the evening or whatever, and let them read to you. Let them read the story back to you, especially if it's a favorite story that you've read 100 times and you know it word by word, and so do they. So let them read it to you, because reading is so critical. Rhyming, talk to them, sing to them, play silly games with them, verbalize with them, communicate and have conversations, because that helps them grow and develop that brain. And children are based on routine. They feel very safe and comfortable if they are living in a routine-rich environment, meaning they know they get up in the morning, they go to the bathroom, they do their business, they wash their hands and their face, they go to get breakfast, and then they get ready for their day, whatever that means, going to school or go to grandma's or whatever. Keep those routines as best as you can for your children, especially if they're going through some kind of trauma or challenges in their life, or things are getting rough. Those routines make them feel safe, and they know that this happens, then the next thing that's going to happen. So that's why programs, schools, and education environments really follow routines, because some kids thrive on routines, and some kids more so than others. Some kids are, it's just their personality and they're more flexible. Some kids they're not flexible. And if you throw off their routine, you are going to have a child that is not really engaged, is not happy, and is having a hard time and is struggling. So try to stick to routines as best you can. Holidays are a hard time to stick to routines because there's so much added stuff that we feel we have to get done during those months that it really throws off all the routines for the kiddos. And that season, that holiday season, that's more difficult. Reward your kids, and that doesn't mean you have to pay them money or go buy them presents or something. It means you have to praise them. Let them know when they do something positive. We tend to get so busy as adults, and in our world it is so crazy sometimes that we forget to tell kids and praise them and thank them when they've done a good job, even if it's just for something really simple, like, that was really nice of you. You picked up your brother's bottle for him. That was really sweet. Those praises will go work wonders for that child and for you, because if you don't praise them, but you only pay attention to them when the behavior is not acceptable, then pretty soon those unacceptable behaviors become more frequent, because that's the only way they get their attention. And so kids are attention getters. And so we want to make sure we give those positive reasons to get that attention, not the negative. And then relationships, of course, as parents, build that strong relationship. And we've all heard about bonding, and we bond with those infants. But bonding doesn't just stop once the child turns into a toddler. We need to bond with our kids all through life, because if we are there for our kids as they grow older and they face challenges in life, they will go to you rather than to a friend or a friend's mom or, a teacher or someone else, because they never learned to go to you, because you never built that strong of a relationship. So build those strong relationships for your kids. And sometimes, it's a challenge. It's hard. There's so many things that we as adults and parents have to be responsible for, that sometimes doing all of these simple things that sound fairly simple turn into monumental things, because they take time and they take intentionality for us to focus and to do those things. But if we can do those and know that, okay, today was a rotten day and I didn't do any of those things. Okay, life happens. Tomorrow's another day. Start with a positive intention to do as many of those things as you can. because it will really benefit your child. Their brain will grow and develop. You will build that strong relationship with your child, and we will end up with a community full of responsible adults that are leading our next world for us as we grow and we age. So the most important thing that parents need to understand is that the brain of their child will become exactly what the child was exposed to. That is the beauty of the human brain. It is the mirror to the child's developmental experience. And that's Dr. Bruce Perry, an American psychiatrist, and he's done a lot of research on young children and families and behaviors, and he's quite the expert in our field. And so I think, this quote just really speaks to how important you as parents are, how important our children are to us, and how we together with our children can really make them successful so that when they're our age, they can look back at life and say, I had a good life. Stuff happened that I wasn't really fond about, but you know what? That's part of life. But overall, I have a good life. And I hope that I've made a big impression on those people in my life, because we want to make sure that we're touching people all around us, that we really are taking care of them and nurturing those children so that they can nurture us. As I used to tell my students, that the one thing I hoped as I aged, that all our children would have such a wonderful and positive environment and grow up and be caring, nurturing adults, that if I were ever having to go to care in a nursing home or whatever, that it was children, those adults that were caring for me were children that came with a healthy environment and have healthy development so that they could take care of me, because they're going to be taking care of me as I was taking care of them. So we want to make sure that, that spectrum that comes around is a positive one for us all through life and everywhere we go. And then just a quick little tidbit about brains. Female bodies and brains are on average slightly smaller than males. Also, Neanderthals had bigger brains than us. Now, think about that. And I think females were, typically most females, not all, were built smaller stature. So of course our brains are going to be smaller because our bodies are smaller, but that doesn't mean that we're not smarter, because we are smarter in many ways. And our male counterparts are smarter in other ways. We all have our uniquenesses about us, and we want to make sure that we really are nurturing not only our own brain, but those other people in our lives as well. And I'm not sure about the Neanderthals having bigger brains than us. I don't know. Any comments? Because I'm not sure about that one. But I thought that was kind of interesting that, research would show that. And I don't know how they do, because I don't know that there's a Neanderthal alive to be able to study.
I have studied that a little bit, and they base it on the size of the brain cavity, but it's not outside of the scope of like people nowadays. Like some people have bigger brain cavity than other people, and so Neanderthals on average have a bigger brain cavity than we have on average, but there are people now who have the same brain capacity, the same size brain cavity as Neanderthals. So it's not like a huge difference.
Thank you, Erin. That makes perfect sense. Yeah, so I often wondered about that statement but yeah, that it just makes sense. Thank you. Did you know that your brain can generate enough electricity to power a light bulb? I always thought that was kind of interesting. But, there's all kinds of fun brain facts online and things that you can read. And some of them, they sound like they're kind of out there and may not be research based, but some of them are just kind of fun to read. But I'm hoping that this evening we were able to kind of give you some of that information about Epic Pueblo, who we are and what we do and why we do it. as well as that parent-child relationship. And parents is the most important teacher of their children, and how that parent can nurture that child, their brain development, which in turn nourishes their entire being and their entire development. So on this slide is, if you have any questions, there's our contact information. If you'd like to reach out at any time, email is probably the best way for me. I do check them regular. Phone messages, leave me a message if I don't answer. I try to get back and respond within 48 hours if I can. But we really are trying to reach as many families in particular as we can through our efforts, because we really feel that's where our focus should be, as well as that's what's going to make us stronger as a community at large all the way around. So any questions?
Cindy, I do have another book. So when you're done asking questions, I can read my favorite book.
Okay, let's do questions first, and then you can read your book.
Hey,
Okay.
Cindy, we did have a couple questions about the child's brain and trauma, and if there was a way for them, like, is there a way for healing when the brain has experienced trauma? And what would that look like?
Yes and no. It depends on the extent of the trauma that's happened to the brain. But depending on where that level of damage is, the brain can be nurtured and regrouped and grow. And as I said, if one half part of the brain was damaged, the other components of the brain can take up some of those skills, but you have to relearn. You have to teach the brain to relearn. And so trauma definitely affects our brain, no doubt about that. And that's not just physical trauma. It could be emotional trauma as well. And so how do we get past that? We need to make sure that we're looking at what caused the trauma and how extensive is the damage. And so we start to where are they at now? What do we need to do first to get them to move forward, to rebuild some of those cells and to build other cells to take over some of those skills that they've lost because of the brain. Anybody else have a response? Erin, do you have anything to add to that? You've studied that. I thought maybe you had some words of wisdom for us. I hate to put you on the spot, but speak up if if anybody has any experience with it. I hope I answered the question the best I could. I mean, it's so individualized because you just don't know.
Yeah, I know that has like so many layers to it. I was just thinking,
Right.
even like for probably a lot of us, we have kids that are somewhere probably at the early on the ACE scale, or ACE scale.
ACE scale.
Yes, like that are in whatever they are. And so, what could we do proactively to help our children move past trauma, or like move? I mean, I guess you're moving through it. Like all of the stuff you said about reading and being intentional was so good. So thank you for just sharing all of your pearls of wisdom. But if there's anything else that just comes to you, you're like, this would be a helpful thing to pass on.
Okay.
For all years, we just want to learn and be better parents.
Thank you. Yeah, we actually do have a training that we do about working with children that have worked through trauma. But I'm not a medical expert, so I can't speak to that piece of it, but I can speak that training kind of does address some of those behaviors that happen, and what can parents and educators do to work with children that have had those experiences to work through it, because you're right, you just don't go past it. It's part of who you are at that point. And so how do you learn to live with it, and how does your brain and your body accommodate some of those things you may have lost because of it?
I have something to add.
Sure.
I'm Annabelle. I'm one of our parents.
Okay, Annabelle.
Challenge. I work at the hospital, so I get to see a lot of that. I work in the imaging department, and we had one of the things about science doesn't lie. When you were talking about like trauma, I think you're talking more like like neglect that kind of trauma, but I was kind of taking it the other way, that this patient basically crashed into a tree and his whole frontal lobe is basically destroyed. He's alive. He can breathe on his own. He's there. But as far as processing emotions, being able to help himself with basic needs, he's like, he can't do any of that. So I just thought I wanted to add that science doesn't lie. It's true.
You're absolutely right. Thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome. I'm going to try to mute myself now. It's going to take me a while.
Any other comments, questions? And I want to thank those people for sharing, because I know sometimes it's really hard to share. And sometimes when you're talking about families and children, it can get personal because we all have life experiences. And so sometimes it's hard to share. And even if we don't share, it may bring up some feelings in us, that we have to deal with or that we're dealing with. And that's not always easy. And I so appreciate you willing to share and to just attend and to listen, because I know, we never know what's information that is out there or what we might say or do is going to affect somebody else because of some experience they've had. And so we try always to be as sensitive as we can to everybody. And that goes, with our kids and our families that we work with. We need to be as sensitive as we can and not just jump to conclusions about what is happening to them or not. So thank you for those of you that have shared, and those of you that are, feeling heartfelt emotions inside, because, that makes you real. That makes you a person that cares. And that's what we want, because that's how we teach our children that we care about others. Anything else?
Yeah, I had just a word of encouragement I wanted to share. So I do have some training in this area, and then have also walked through that as a mother with my kids through some pretty extreme trauma. But I just wanted to share a word of encouragement that there is a lot of research and evidence about even the neuroplasticity of the brain. And like you said, parts being able to take over. But a big way that happens, not only through nurture and empathy, is also through creativity. So even just, if your family is going through a tough time or whatever, just try to at least get the kids in the pool, or, stand on a beach or whatever, or even just any little nurturing thing can really be very helpful and supportive. Even a warm fuzzy blanket or a hug or music. Music is also incredible.
Right.
So art, and that the whole art therapy world, even, or animals. So there's so much amazing research on how that promotes trauma healing and rewiring in the brain so that they're able to reconnect with joy again. So, yes, I just wanted to put that out there. I think there's just a lot of hope and a lot that they're still discovering about brain healing. So if there's anyone that feels overwhelmed or discouraged out there, I just want to say there's a lot of hope. So yeah, just be open. There's a lot out there.
Thank you. And I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the trainings we do about children living with trauma is that creative piece. In fact, we just did it a couple months ago, because we do a monthly training in the community, and that was the topic for that. So I brought in an artist who is also a licensed therapist. And so I did that brain development piece, and he did that creative expression piece, and he took the students up to his art studio and they did an activity. And I mean, he walked them through some of the trauma information of how trauma can respond to that creative piece in us, and that we forget sometimes. And sometimes it's just a matter of, if it's a young child, give them art activities to do, give them a crayon and piece of paper if you have nothing else, but something to express their feelings, to get some of those emotions out. So the students really, really like that class. We're going to have him back, as a matter of fact, because they just loved it so much. But yeah, there are so many things. Thank you for sharing that, because that really is one of those things that works really well, that creative piece of us, how we can use that to heal from lots of different kinds of adverse experiences that we have as human beings. Anyone else? I just love this. You guys are just so in tune, and I'm so appreciative. Yes.
Just wanted to add an experience. My my daughters already grown up. One of them is in college, and my younger one is a teenager. But she'll remember a book vividly when I used to read it to her, and she'll talk about it with like family or friends, and then she'll be like, "Oh yeah, my mom used to read this book in Spanish," and like she mimics me, and then like she does exactly like the voices, kind of like when you were reading, you're like, oh, okay. She does that all the. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm like, that sounds like me. Like, yeah, I read that. And my oldest one too remembers, but they only remember one book because it was their favorite one, and they remember that, and it's just like, wow. They remember.
They do. And that's a good point. Things stick with us, and we tend to hold on to those memories, especially those positive memories, and they sustain us as we move forward, and they help make us who we are. So they turn around and they do it with other people because they learned it from you. That's a beautiful story. Thank you. Any other comments?
How do you find out about the monthly classes that you were speaking about?
We send out a monthly flyer. I could send that out through Parents Challenge, and they can forward it to your listserv that you are all on. They're held in Pueblo, and they're the first Thursday of every month, and it's a different topic, and it's from 5:30 to 7:30. We serve a light dinner, and there's no charge.
Do you have to sign up for them?
We would prefer you do, just because we do serve food. We want to make sure nobody goes away hungry. So we ask that.
Is there a website that we could check out, or?
We posted on Rocky Mountain SARE Facebook page, as well as my Facebook page, Cindy Bernal. We put it out that way as well. And as I said, we can certainly, once the flyer is ready for the coming month, we'll send it out to Parents Challenge, and they can forward it out there. And if you're a licensed provider or early childhood professional or a foster parent or something, we are qualified, Tess and I, to the trainings we do to give you credit for those hours that you need during the year. So you will get 2 hours of credit for attending those trainings. So we can certainly send that information and get it out to you. And you're certainly more than welcome. And
yeah, I'd be super interested in it. So I'll check out your Facebook, and hopefully we'll get the information from Parents Challenge.
Okay, Tess, remember, she's the one that does all of our communication, sending out information. So I'll make sure she has that, and we'll get you on her list to send it out.
Yeah, for sure.
And if Melissa, if you're fine with sending us, and the attendees that would like to give you permission to give us their email, we'll just add it to the list, and it'll go directly to them. We can do it that way as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll get them whatever they need.
Okay. All right. Any other questions? I know we have a little one waiting for one last story, so.
Okay. Oh, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear you and see you. I can.
Okay, great. Okay, I hope everybody can too, because this is my favorite book. It's called Chrysanthemum.
Can you hold it up a little higher, Tess?
A little bit higher?
There you go, yeah.
Okay, so this is Chrysanthemum. And this is one of my favorite books. The day she was born was the happiest day in her parents' life. She's perfect, said her mother. Absolutely, said her father. And she was. She was absolutely perfect. Her name must be everything she is, said her father. Her name must be absolutely perfect, said her mother. And it was. Chrysanthemum. They named her Chrysanthemum. And Chrysanthemum grew and grew and grew until she was old enough to appreciate it. She loved her name. She loved the way it sounded when her mother woke her up. Wake up, Chrysanthemum. And she loved it the way it sounded when her father called her for dinner. Chrysanthemum, come and eat. And she loved the way it sounded when she whispered it to herself in the bathroom mirror. Chrysanthemum, chrysanthemum, chrysanthemum. She loved it when it was written on a letter. She really loved it on her birthday cake. And she wrote it with a great big orange crayon. She liked the way it looked, and she wrote it herself. Chrysanthemum, chrysanthemum, chrysanthemum. She thought her name was absolutely perfect. And then she started school. On the first day, she wore her sunniest dress, and she wore her biggest smile, and she ran all the way to school. Hooray, said Chrysanthemum, school. But when Mrs. Chudd did roll call, everyone giggled when they heard her name. Mrs. Chudd said Dawn, Eve, Lois, Al, Les, Kay, Max, Sue, Bill, Pat, Tom, Sam, Ken, Joe, Rita, Victoria, and Chrysanthemum. They all laughed. Was that very, very kind? No. It's so long, said Joe. It scarcely fits on your name tag, said Rita, pointing. I'm named after my grandmother, said Victoria, and you're named after a flower. Chrysanthemum wilted. She did not think her name was absolutely perfect. She thought it was absolutely dreadful. The rest of the day was not much better. During nap time, Victoria raised her hand and informed Mrs. Chudd that Chrysanthemum's name was spelled with 13 letters, and that was exactly half as many letters as there are in the entire alphabet, Victoria explained. Thank you for sharing that with us, Victoria, said Mrs. Chudd, but now put your head down and take a rest. If I had a name like yours, I'd change it, said Victoria, as they lined up to go home. I wish I could, said Chrysanthemum wearily. Welcome home, said her mother. Welcome home, said her father. She said, school is no place for me. My name is too long. It scarcely fits on my name tag, and I'm named after a flower. Oh, pish, said her mother. Your name is beautiful and precious and priceless and fascinating and winsome, said her father. It's everything you are, said her mother. Absolutely perfect, said her father. Chrysanthemum felt much better after her favorite dinner of macaroni and cheese with ketchup, and an evening filled with hugs and kisses and parcheesi. That night, Chrysanthemum dreamed that her name was Jane, and it was an extremely pleasant dream. The next morning, Chrysanthemum wore her most comfortable jumper. She walked to school slowly as she could. She dragged her feet in the dirt. Chrysanthemum, 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 she wrote. She even looked like a flower, said Victoria. Chrysanthemum entered the playground. Let's pick her, said Rita, pointing. Let's smell her, said Joe. Chrysanthemum wilted. She did not think her name was absolutely perfect. She thought it was absolutely dreadful. The rest of the day was not much better. During nap time, Victoria raised her hand and said, Hey, chrysanthemum is a flower, and it lives in a garden with worms and other dirty things. Thank you for sharing that with us, Victoria, said Mrs. Chudd. Now put your head down and rest. I cannot believe your name, said Victoria, as the other students lined up to go home. Neither can I, thought Chrysanthemum, miserably. Welcome home, said her mother. Welcome home, said her father. School is no place for me, said Chrysanthemum. They said I even look like a flower, and they pretended to pick me and smell me. Oh, pish, said her mother. They're just jealous and envious and begrudging and discontented and jaundiced, said her father. Who wouldn't be jealous of a name like yours, said her mother. After all, it's absolutely perfect, said her father. Chrysanthemum felt a trifle better after her favorite dessert of chocolate cake with buttercream frosting, and another evening filled with hugs and kisses and parcheesi. That night, Chrysanthemum dreamed that she really was a chrysanthemum. She sprouted leaves and petals, and Victoria picked her and plucked her leaves and petals one by one until there was nothing left but a scrawny stem. That was the worst nightmare of Chrysanthemum's life. Chrysanthemum wore her outfit with 7 pockets the next morning. She loaded her pockets with their most prized possessions to give her good luck charms. Chrysanthemum took the longest route possible to school. She stopped and stared at each and every flower. Chrysanthemum, 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 the flowers seemed to say. That morning, the students were introduced to Mrs. Twinkle. Her voice was like something out of a dream, as was everything else about her. Her students were speechless. They thought Mrs. Twinkle was an indescribable wonder. They went out of their way to make a nice impression. Mrs. Twinkle led the students in scales, and then she assigned roles for the class musical. Victoria was chosen as the dainty fairy queen. Rita was chosen as the spiffy butterfly princess. And Joe was chosen as the all-important pixie messenger. And Chrysanthemum was chosen to be a daisy. Chrysanthemum's a daisy, chrysanthemum's a daisy, Joe, Rita, and Victoria chanted, thinking it was very funny. Chrysanthemum wilted. She did not think her name was absolutely perfect. She thought it was absolutely dreadful. What's so humorous? Asked Mrs. Twinkle. Chrysanthemum was the answer. Her name is so long, said Joe. It scarcely fits on her name tag, said Rita, pointing. I'm named after my grandmother, said Victoria, and she's named after a flower. My name is long, said Mrs. Twinkle. It is, said Joe. My name would scarcely fit on a name tag, said Mrs. Twinkle. It would, said Rita, pointing. And, said Mrs. Twinkle, I'm named after a flower too. You are, said Victoria. Yes, said Mrs. Twinkle. My name is Delphinium, Delphinium Twinkle. And if my baby is a girl, I'm considering naming her Chrysanthemum. I think it's absolutely perfect. Chrysanthemum could barely believe her ears. She blushed, she beamed, she bloomed. Chrysanthemum, chrysanthemum, chrysanthemum. Joe, Rita, and Victoria looked at Chrysanthemum longingly. Call me Marigold, said Joe. I'm a carnation, said Rita, pointing. My name is Lily of the Valley, said Veronica. And Chrysanthemum did not think that her name was absolutely perfect. She knew it. And the epilogue. Overall, the class musical was a huge success. Chrysanthemum was actually absolutely perfect as Daisy. Victoria made the only mistake. She completely forgot her lines as the dainty fairy queen. Chrysanthemum thought it was wildly funny, and she giggled all throughout her Dance of the Flowers. And eventually, Mrs. Twinkle gave birth to a healthy baby girl. And of course, what do you think she named her? Chrysanthemum. The end.
Thanks, Tess.
Oh, you're welcome.
Do we have any other questions, comments? We're almost at our 8 o'clock time.
Okay, I think if we don't have any more questions, I'm going to do the door prizes. So just at random, Melissa Davis, Kara Edwards, and Heather Melendez. So a gift card will be sent to
You'll
you.
get, an Amazon gift card. Check your spam within the next 2 days if you don't see it. And if you don't get it, let us know. Also, I posted the survey in the chat, so please fill that out for Cindy and Tess. They did a wonderful job and they want your feedback. I'm going to post it on Band as well in the events under this session, so you can find it if you don't get to do it tonight. And please stay on while we take attendance. And Cindy and Tess, you can go. Thank you so much. It was wonderful.
Thank you
Thank
for
you.
inviting us.
And just
Absolutely.
let us, give us the results from the surveys, because
Yes.
we can't fix it if we don't know it needs to be fixed. So we always look for those.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I'll send you that in a few weeks after everybody gets a
Okay, yeah,
chance to
that's
take it.
fine. Okay.
Thank you.
And thank you,
All right, have a
everyone.
good one.
Good night.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.